Hello. So I'm gonna want to try to make some more complicated things, and I can't just keep doing that without explaining myself. So I'm gonna try to just do a quick explanation of Vex in general, because without basic understanding of it, then I'm sure it's gonna be hard to follow along with Vex stuff. And so yeah, so I'm gonna put a GL and then a box and then an attribute wrangle. And so yeah, all the layout is, you click here, you go split top to bottom, and then over here you right click on the default view, whatever it is, and you hit inspectors and then geometry spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet shows you point mode, vertex mode, primitive mode, and detail. Now these may mean nothing because they can be very confusing, or at least they were for me, but the short of it is points are these. So this is a box with 8 sides, so there's 8 points starting from 0. So it may say 7, but it's actually 8 because the first one is at 0. And vertices mode is barely use it, but it's the way points connect to primitives. So you barely need to touch vertices mode. I don't think I've ever used vertices mode actively. I'm just gonna skip over this and primitive mode. And yes, I did just skip over it because if you want to learn more, there's more people than me. Primitive mode is basically these sections are primitives. So there are 6 primitives. So these big blocks here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're basically what the vertices connect to. So if you want to, for example, extrude only one side, you can select only one primitive. And detail mode just runs once. It's great. So if you want to just have a single variable that is active on the whole object and is not tied to a specific point, it's just global. It's going to be in detail mode. Now, just so I don't fully go, oh yeah, just figure it out. In regards to vertices mode, there is the help file. So if you click on the help button on the side, and if you go points, vertices, there you go, points and vertices. This page will explain better than me what a vertex is. So there we go. It's a reference to a point. Primitives use vertices to reference points. For example, the corners of a polygon, the center of a sphere, and a control vertex of a spline curve. Now, go over this page if you want to go more in depth in the differences. I'm just going to mainly say that you're mainly going to end up winding down to the points mode to mess with individual points, or the detail mode to just give something a global, like this whole object has, 6 apples for some reason. And on this Wrangle side, you have, if you type in Wrangle in general, if you just type in Wrangle, you'll get all these options. Doesn't really matter because, and I usually go point Wrangle because if you click on the Wrangle and then you go run over, the options are right there. It's the exact same node, just with different options set. So by default, it's in points mode, and points mode is kind of like a big loop. So it actually runs for as many points as you have. So in this case, there's like 8 points. And so this thing is going to run 8 times. So if I go at test equals 1, it's going to do it every single one of these times. For example, there's a built-in function called point number, which will tell you the current number of the point. So if I go at ptnum, you'll see it's actually different for each one of these. It just ran this 8 times and it gave a different value. So you're kind of like stuck in a big for each point do this loop. And it's kind of odd in the beginning, but it's beneficial because you're skipping a lot of code and it's more optimized to work on a CPU level. If you go into detail and you make a variable, I don't know, I'm gonna to say at global, and when you say at, that kind of assigns a variable. So if you say global variable is 1, that's not going to show up here, it's going to show up here. And it's only going to run once. So if you ever want to make something like this is going to stay here no matter what, and you don't want to waste resources by assigning it to every single one of these points, you make a detail wrangle once, and you assign it there, and then you can fetch it for whatever you want. Now, in terms of variables, this is the same as most languages, I guess, apart from JavaScript and a few others. So you can't just go var my thing equals whatever, because var is meaningless here. It needs to, like, it can't just be a generic variable. You need to say, I need this to be a float. A float is, for example, 1.2. So it's a number which has something after the full stop. So it's a trailing number. Actually, no, it's not a trailing number. It's a number that just you don't need to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need to go 1.5, 1.8. That's when you would use a float. An integer is 1 or 5 or 10, and it's obvious. It's kind of obvious differences. You can't go 3.2 or 3.3. You can, but if you, for example, assign this number, so if you say at my int equals my int, and I'm gonna put that in points mode, it went back to 3 because it knew that you said this is an int, and yet even though it's not an int here, that's what I'm gonna take. String yeah, is a literal string, so it's used for text, descriptions, other things. Vector is a 3-sided vector. So for example, so it's kind of like a combination of floats. So my vector equals open bracket, close bracket, and then in here you can say 1.2 comma 1.3 comma 2. That creates 3 floats in once as a vector. So for example, XYZ is a vector. Color is a vector because it has red, green, blue. So if I go at my vector is my vector. Let's see. There is a green. Why is it green? Let's find out. If I just move my mouse over here, it says implicit cast from vector to float. So this is where we go into the assignments. So the same way you said it's a vector here, you should put a V here to say it's a vector there. And now you can see it actually made 3 numbers, part of the same vector, showing you what you just entered. There are vector, which is like 3. There's vector 2, which is just 2 numbers. And there's vector 4, which is 4 numbers. And there's other ones that get even bigger, like matrix. And an array. An array is a little bit more complicated. It's a group of numbers or a group of texts or a group of it's a group of anything. So anything can be an array. It's basically saying I want to have a list of items. So I want to have 16 colors that I want to sample from, or I want to have eight positions where I want to go to. Those would be arrays. So for example, let's go with let's make it like I want to have a couple of IDs I want to reference, which are strings. So I can go string ID equals, let's go IDs equal my ID. Now it's a string, but if you want to have many of them, you put open bracket, close bracket in here, and then put an object thing here. So if I go So now this becomes a list. So my ID2, you know, etc., etc. And if it looks confusing, because you've put up square brackets and then these object brackets, that's kind of the way Vex is. I know it's, you know, I wish I could put object brackets in here as well. But if I go in here and then I copy paste this, like these, I'll get a big error because I didn't actually say what it is. So it is a string, which is good, but it's also an object. It's also an array, so I need to put the array tag here. And now you'll see it's here. So this is just like a grocery list. Very useful, very used depending on what you need. So if you want to have, for example, like just one of them, so if I want to have ID 1, you can say I want to grab the first thing from the IDs, the first grocery list item. And, you know, array start at 0, so you go 0. Now just grab just the first ID. And I realize there's so much information with this kind of stuff. If you've never done any coding, it can be really frustrating. Just like remember, when in doubt, use a float, which will give you the most options because you can go 1.5, -6, negative, you know, plus, negative. So you can use a float for numbers, use a string for words, and ignore arrays unless you actually want to go a little bit more complicated, but know that they're there. And vectors is what most of your default things that you'll be using are. So remember these things. So remember, for example, color, which is at CD, it's a vector. So CD equals, let's go 110. And let me just delete all this stuff. Because it's going to give me a big error. So if I go, and I'll just leave this as a comment. So if I go 110, now it's yellow because, you know, 1 on the red, 1 on the green, 0 on the blue. So it actually says it here. So you can see CDR, which is the first one, CDG is the second one, CDB is the last one. So that became yellow. So know that your position, your color, I think there's a lot of other ones. I think these are the main ones I use. I think orient, which is the rotation when you're doing copy to points, that's a vector. At scale is a vector. So whenever you look at built-in variables, a lot of times they're going to be vectors. So just be aware of how you normally write them. So for example, if you want to just manually write them, then this is the correct way. But if you want to use like a custom thing, so if you want to have the red one be manually adjustable, so let's say it's a float, obviously. So if I say red color is a float, so I'm gonna say red equals 1, and I'm gonna put the same thing as before, except I'm gonna say red instead of 1. That's gonna give you an error because now you're declaring something before, and now you want to add on the top. So the safest way to declare a vector is using set. So if you go set, open bracket, and then red, and then 1, and then 0. Now it doesn't give you an error. Now you can, let me just make that 0. Now you can do anything you want in here. So you can have, you know, math stuff. So you can go plus, you know, multiplications, whatever. You can do a lot of things in here. As long as you're using set, that's your safe way of making a vector. So, yeah, float, string, and vector are the 3 main ones. Now with channels, which are the nice shortcut way of you adjusting stuff without touching code too much. With channels, you have a few options. So you have a channel F for float, I think S for string. So the same idea. So channel, for example, float red color equals channel float red underscore color. and then you click on the little slider here. So you've just made a float channel, which goes from 0 to 1. If you were to say S, it would make a empty box, which is going to be string. If you say int, it's going to give you an it's going to make, why don't I just do it int. There. Make sure it's I for int. It's actually going to give you like a full integer, so you physically can't go point something. It needs to be a whole number. Yes, these are very good for shortcut stuff. So if you want to have like a control box where you control all your numbers, this is perfect. And those are called channels. So channels are also in the help file. If you type in channels and you search for them, you can see all the options, and they're really useful. So yeah, float, string, vector are your main options for coding. And then if you want to have shortcuts for them, you use channels. If you want to multiply or divide or mess with them, you can do it directly as long as they're properly named. And if specific to vector, you need to put a set before it. So if you want to mess with the vectors, you need to actually do a proper open close bracket and then mess with them. Yeah, and this applies to everything. So if you were to do this in detail mode or points mode or vertices mode, same math, same everything, except now you're moving into these modes. If you want to, now let's say I'm in detail mode and I want to access a point. Now that's how you're going to access a point from detail mode. Well, if you were to start tapping, so let's say you want to grab point number 0 and you want to grab its position or something, you would go, oh, okay, well, position is a vector, so I know it's a vector. Position equals, and then you start typing what do you think it is. So you know it's a point, so you go point, open bracket, and here's a nice help file. It says geometry, attribute name, and point number, and then what kind of variables they are. So geometry is 0 because it's so this little dot here is 0, then it got 1, then you got 2, and then you got 3. So you use 0, and then P, because you wanted the position, and then the number of the points. So there's 8 points, so, and I just want the first one, so I'm going to go 0. And just to show you, so if I go V for vector at position, or however you spell it, and that's this, equals that, and then go into detail mode, there it is. And you can do the same for all of them. So if you want to go into point mode and access detail, you start typing in detail, or vertex, or vertice, or primitive. These are just shortcut functions. I think if I go F1 on them, it's going to give you a manual. Yeah, there you go. So you can see here, these are shortcut ways of accessing all the options. So even though they live in different worlds, they're very much mutually accessible. So sometimes you don't need to do a point attribute or a detail attribute. You can just do it set somewhere and then go somewhere else and touch and like access there, update somewhere else. And yeah, it's pretty useful. So that's kind of how these modes are connected. It's all part of the same object. It's just a way of accessing one or the other. Going back to when I said the point mode is kind of like a loop, I can show you what I mean. So in detail mode, if I want to say add p plus equals 1, nothing's going to happen because you're not in points mode. But you can make your own points mode. Now this is you should not do this because it's more performant to just use the points mode, but I want to show you. So you need, how many points are there? So int point count equals, there's a literal built-in function called endpoints. Oh, float to int. Why is it float to int? Let's find out. I equals m. Let's find out. Okay. Okay, maybe it's not endpoints. What is it? Num points? Oh, try this num-pt. Yeah, there we go. Okay, num-pt. Point count 8. All this is in the manual. So if you can find all this stuff in there. So you can see it's 8. There's 8 points. So we got a number of points. So what we can do is go for I equals 0. I is smaller than point count. I plus plus. And in here, you can grab the point. So let's say I want to grab the position. Instead of, if you were in points mode, you would just go P. But here you would need to go vector position equals, well, I'm just going to grab this because you already have it here, is this. And to get the point number, you will type in I, because what this is doing is going 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep going until I reach how many points there are. So it's going to stop by 7, by 8, but last one's going to be 7. So this will actually grab every single one of these points, one by one, and get their positions. So now you got the position. Let me just... oh, I forgot. You need to say int. Int I equals 0. And I equal... oh, excuse me, 1 second. I deleted this and I shouldn't have. So I go int I equals 0. You got... there we go. Okay, so that's actually working. Why is it giving me an error? Let's find out. Oh, I've already declared this. Okay, yeah. Didn't like the fact that I've already made this. Okay, so now you get the position of every point. Now you want to update it. Well, let's first change the value. So position dot x plus equals 1, which will add 1 to the x. Or you can also go open bracket 0 equals 1. Which, because the vector can also act like an array, so you can, you can just go open bracket. But, let's use x because it's more clear what it is. Okay, so now if you want to update this position, you would go set, and it's a point, so set point attribute, open bracket. Same logic as before. So you would go 0, what the attribute is, which is P, position. Oh, sorry. You would need to actually say which number, which ID it is. So in this case, it's I, position. And then you will write set at the end, which is, I think, optional, but do it anyway. Okay, there we go. Now, again, if you're confused, you hit F1 over while selecting the option. You can see all the data. You can see all the info on this. So, the point number is an integer, which we declared. The name is a string, P, value right there, and then set. So we just, this detail is currently acting like a point wrangle. So when I said like you're basically in a loop, the point wrangle is if you were to remove this, now it's a point, like the point wrangle is this. So these pieces of code are already accounted for, and you're already in here in the point wrangle with a bunch of helper functions and helper variables and all the rest of it. So you don't need to do all this stuff. And also, it's not as, clunky and manual. Houdini actually optimizes for the point wrangle, so it doesn't. So writing in there is going to be a lot better for everyone. But I wanted to show you just so you know. And sometimes you do need to do this, and it's good to have some practice. And yeah, like point is a function, vertex is a function. So like if you were to, for example, if you like, how do I get a variable? You would go, variable, e.g. point. How do I set? You would go set variable, edge. So for example, set vertex. So that's kind of how you get in set. And that's like, to me, at least, that's like 90% of it. You get thing, you set the thing, you check if what kind of variable it is, you make sure it's a pointer, and you don't mess that up. When you set everything correctly, things are not gonna like go haywire, and Houdini doesn't really crash like a lot of pieces of software. So if, for example, I mean, it does, every software crashes, but like you can't make an infinity loop as easily. So for example, in JavaScript, I can just freely make like this greater than point count, or I can make a for loop that is not even like logical, and JavaScript is just gonna say, yeah, sure, why not, and then it's gonna crash the browser. Whereas here, the whole, whenever you make something crazy, like Houdini is gonna stop you. So you feel free to experiment and mess around with variables. Um, I know this is not like a pretty little visual effects like video, but I wanted to just quickly go over this because I do want to go into more Vex, and I don't want to, you know, like I don't want to like feel bad because like I'm not explaining every single definition. I will explain as much as I can, but yeah, hopefully this helps someone. Thanks.